Hi guys, this is Dr. Gonzalez, and this video is going to be a very brief introduction to experimental methods. This is intended for Psychology 4331, Social Work 4363. It does say summer of 2025, but it's actually the summer of 2026 now when I'm recording this. So without further ado, here we go. So this course is basically going to be divided into two major sections. We're going to have a section where we go over research methods, and we're having a section that's going to review the statistics that are generally used in experiments. So research methods, in this course, you're going to learn the procedures for how we conduct experiments. And most of those experiments are going to be in psychology because this is a primarily psychology class. You're going to learn how to understand and evaluate and carry out research, but you're not going to actually carry out any research. You're going to design a research project. You're going to write a paper about that research project, but you're not going to actually carry it out. And I want you to learn how to critically think about research so that when you're reading someone else's paper or a dissertation, you're able to evaluate their work using your critical thinking skills. Now, the statistics portion of this course is going to focus on picking the appropriate statistical procedure for analyzing data that came from some sort of experiment. So you're going to get a good background in the statistical procedures that you need to be able to do experiments. And we're going to focus mainly on inferential statistics, specifically t-tests and ANOVA. So if you are a psychology major, there are two research methods classes that you have to take for graduation. You have to take 4371, which is this class, and that's experimental methods and statistics, and it focuses on situations where we manipulate or control a variable, and we're specifically evaluating a cause and effect relationship. Psych 4370 is non-experimental methods, and in that course we focus on research that is about relationships, specifically correlation between two variables. So there is an independent variable, but it's not intentionally manipulated. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case you've taken the other course and you're wondering, well, why am I in this one? Or if you know you've got to take Psych 4370, I usually teach that both in the fall and spring semesters as well. So in the first chapter of Morling's book, she talks about how research is produced and your role in research as either a producer or a consumer. So you may participate in research every day in many ways in your own personal life. You might be taking coursework like this class. Maybe you work in a research lab, maybe you're going to go to grad school, and maybe you're thinking about a future career as a professor or out there in industry. But you might not have a career where you produce research after graduation, but I guarantee you, you will be a consumer of research. So it's important for you to be critical and savvy when you consume that information. We live in the digital age. It's the information age. You're on the internet and on your devices every day. Even since I taught this course last year to now, AI is the big thing that's out there that does feed information to people. So you need to learn how to navigate through print and online news sources, and then you're going to have to make decisions about things in your life, whether it be your career, your life, your school, your health, your children's medical treatments or therapies, etc. So the skills you learn as a critical research thinker won't just help you if you're going to do research, it also helps you if you consume it. So here's just a few things that I threw on a slide here. You might be faced at some point in time in your life with having to evaluate different options for cancer treatment. That's something that right now my mom is navigating. And the decision to whether do chemotherapy before having a mastectomy or having a mastectomy first and then doing chemotherapy. It was really important for her to understand the research behind why the doctor was presenting the options he was presenting. You might be thinking about eating healthier, so you may want to learn how to build a Mediterranean diet plate. You could be faced with some sort of supplement out there that your neighbor is saying, hey, this is really good, you need to use it because it flushes toxins. Well, what does that really even mean? And then you might have to take a personality test. This personality test, you might have seen the ENTP letters, acronym, whatever, before someone's personality profile, and it's supposed to tell you something about who they are. But you might be faced with having to take those tests before getting a job, and it's important for you to know how they were developed, how they were validated, and why. So research production and consumption go together. If you're going to be a good consumer of research, you have to start with understanding how research is produced. And you need to understand that scientists are empiricists. That means they depend on data, they test theories, they work and interact within a community, and there are other reasons that you can consult in your textbook. Empiricism is also known as the empirical method, using research, using numbers, experiments, and experimentation. The textbook definition has to do with evidence from the senses and instruments. So basically it's data that you can gather that's going to support something that you're trying to prove or disprove. The book also talks about the theory-data cycle, and basically what this is getting at is that scientists work from a theory-data perspective. They have a theory or a hypothesis about something that leads to research questions, that leads to a research design. That could be either experimental, non-experimental, maybe it could even be qualitative versus quantitative, but we have hypotheses that come next, we collect data, and then we either revise our theory and start over again, or our data contributes to strengthening the theory and we go to something like publication. So good scientific theories are going to be supported by data, obviously. They're not just going to be fly-by-night things, like that advertisement for that supplement on that other page. Good theories are falsifiable. That means I can test them and I can prove them wrong. They have parsimony, which means they're not overly complex. And good theories don't prove anything. They're either supported or refuted based on evidence. I told you scientists work within a community. That means they work with other scientists and they follow a set of norms or ideals. Universalism is the idea that claims are going to be evaluated according to their merit, not based on the reputation or credentials of a specific researcher. So it doesn't matter if you're the top person out there in sleep research. That does bring some merit to it, but your claims as a researcher should not be judged based on the fact that you've produced research in the past in that area. Communality is that scientific knowledge is created in a community and its findings belong to the community. And since they live in the community, those findings are going to be subject to judgment and possibility, the replication of those results by other researchers. Then we move into scientific community being disinterested, and what that means is scientists are striving to discover the truth, no matter what it is, and they're not going to be swayed by things like conviction, idealism, politics, or profit. So a good scientist should not be in it for the money. And then the scientific community also participates in something called organized skepticism. And what this means is that a good scientist is going to question everything, especially and including their own ideas, widely accepted ideas, or even ancient wisdom. So how do scientists go about sharing their results with the scientific community? Well, they can attend conferences and present plenaries or posters or presentations about their research. They may discuss what they're doing on academic social media. I would say that presenting their research in scientific journals through peer-reviewed journal articles is probably the primary way a lot of researchers participate. You'll remember from your other courses that journals should be peer-reviewed. That means they have a group of 3 or 4 anonymous experts on the subject who give an honest assessment of the work, and they may kick that paper back and ask you to revise it before they publish it. It's not a perfect process. You always have the possibility of running into peer or editor bias, or what we call positivity bias, which is the bias that we only publish things that were significant and didn't disprove something, right? But science in the community also builds on other people's work. So publishing things and presenting papers, etc., provides the community with a way of seeing your work so that it can be built upon. So in this class, you're going to get a chance to practice your research skills, and you're going to propose an experiment. And you're going to start by reading, evaluating, and applying research from some journal articles that I'm going to ask you to go out and find. Then I want you to build on that past research by asking yourself, well, what's the next question? What question can I propose to further this research? From that, you're going to pick some sort of methodology to answer your question, and you're not going to be carrying out the research. So you're just going to assume that you'll have whatever resources at your disposal to do it, but you are going to write a proposal paper about what you're proposing to do. So later on in the course, we're going to focus more on what you need for an experiment. But right now, I want you to remember that an experiment is a study that's specifically designed to test a hypothesis. And in this class, we're evaluating cause and effect. So we want to determine if a change in one variable directly causes a change in a response variable. So in an experiment, we're going to have 4 components. First, you've got to have purposeful manipulation of your independent variable, and we're going to talk about each one of these. You've got to control for variables that might impact your results. You're going to have random assignment of your participants to groups or conditions, and you're going to randomly select those participants from your population of interest. So let's look at those components in depth. So the first one was an experiment includes purposeful manipulation of the independent variable. So before you can do an experiment, you've got to have a relationship established between your independent and your dependent variables. Usually that happens through some sort of non-experimental means. You might have a correlational study out there that has shown that there is a correlation between these 2 particular variables. Now we want to establish causality. And to establish causality, I've got to have that purposeful manipulation of that independent variable. That's the variable that we're studying here. And your dependent variable is the response variable or the outcome variable that we're measuring. So let's look at a little bit of an example here. Say you have a researcher who conducted a survey, and he found there was a correlation between electronic device use and delayed onset of sleep. So sleep latency was larger in people who use electronic devices. And this is a very generic question. There would have to be lots of other limitations for this to really work, right? But it's taking longer for people to fall asleep if they've been using an electronic device. So now he wants to work towards causality. So he has to design an experiment, and he's going to have 3 different groups. One, he's going to assign those participants to use electronic devices for up to 2 hours before sleep. 2, they can use electronic devices for 1 hour before sleep. And 3, there is a group that is using no electronic devices before sleep. So your independent variable in that situation is electronic use, and your dependent variable is time of sleep onset, sleep latency. So you've actually got 3 levels of that independent variable there that you're testing. That's going to be important later on. So an experiment also controls for variables that might impact results. So you have to minimize the impact of things that might influence your results other than your independent variable. And we call those other variables extraneous or control variables. In your previous example, you had the researcher that was looking at electronic device use and sleep latency. So the researcher had to control for some variables like age, gender, maybe activity before sleep, caffeine consumption, sleeping medications. Those are a couple of other things he or she might want to control for. Next, the researcher has to use random selection of participants from the population of interest. So maybe he goes to a clinic and he recruits a pool of male participants from that family medicine clinic. He's going to screen them and exclude subjects that have sleep-related illnesses like insomnia or narcolepsy. And then that researcher is going to use random assignment to put those participants in groups or conditions. So he might have had a large pool of possible participants, and once he has that pool established, he's going to say, okay, this one goes in group 1, this one goes in group 2, this one goes in group 3. So maybe he recruits 75 male participants and he has 25 in group 1, 25 in the next group, 25 in the next group. So a way you can remember how to keep the independent and the dependent variables separate is to use the mix dry or dry mix method. And these little acronyms help you remember what you are looking at, what they're doing, and what axis you would plot those variables on if you were making a graph. So dry stands for dependent, responding, and y-axis. So this is what you're measuring, okay? And it goes right here. So that would be sleep latency from our other example. And then mix stands for manipulated, independent, and x-axis. So that goes along here on the x-axis right there. So that would be your electronic device use group, okay? And it's plotted on your x-axis. So to summarize this brief introduction to experimental methods, experiments have to follow 4 different conditions. They have to have manipulation of the independent variable, they have to include controls, and they have random selection and random assignment. And at minimum, an experiment's going to have 3 types of variables. The independent variable, which is the experimental variable the researcher is manipulating, and it's going to have different levels most of the time. The dependent variable, which is the measured outcome variable of interest. It's responding to the independent variable. And then we're going to be aware of control variables. Those are things that might influence our outcome, so we need to control for them so that we can truly attribute whatever is being discovered as a relationship to that independent variable. So I appreciate your time, and I hope that you are ready to learn a lot in this course. It moves really fast, so I look forward to seeing how you grow and develop over the next 8 weeks. Take care.